But our ministry design team at Hope set up these soup suppers, and our goal this year, since we all haven't seen each other in a long time, was to keep it kind of in-house and go to Hope people, familiar faces. Uh, and we just went, we have so many people with so many interesting things to talk about. So I wanted to show you, if you go to the Hope website, so right up here where it says Lenten Soup Supper, if you click on Learn More, so that box right there, you can see our whole schedule for all the Wednesdays. So it has the soup and the recipe, the speaker, and then donations. So you guys have all been around Hope a long time and know we usually do a Lenten mission. This year we have a lot of different things for you to choose from. We asked our speakers about some things that are really close to their hearts, and you'll see some links. Arnie chose the
Yeah.
Dogs of America, which is a group out of Englewood. They have an Amazon list that's on here. So you can find all the information for every week, including recipes, and it'll be on our website right there.
Yeah, I saw the recipe. Look good.
So everything you need should be right there. But as always, please feel free to email any of us if you have questions during the week or you can't find how to get on. And the link to the Zoom is right up here, and that's live every week. So I just wanted to show you all that you have all that information. Yeah. Question? If you want to participate in any of the donations, Stacey and I are going to be at Hope March 2nd, 9th, 16, and 23. That's the Tuesdays in March. And we will be at Hope from 10 to 1 or 4 to 6. And we're happy to take your donations if you'd like to do that. We'll be there. We'll be there to accept. Okay. Does anybody have any questions, schedule questions or anything? All right. Well, with that, I am going to turn it over to Arnie, who is going to talk about his Broncos book.
Okay. Thank you, Kate. So I just wanted to start off with a little bit of background. I have covered the NFL for the Associated Press for a lot of years. I joined Associated Press in 1988 out of college, and I've covered the Green Bay Packers, the Dallas Cowboys, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Denver Broncos. And about maybe not quite 10 years ago, I added the entire NFL to my plate. So now I tell people I cover the Broncos, but a good 60 or 70% of what I do is NFL stories, league-wide trends mostly. I've covered a whole bunch of Super Bowls, about a dozen Super Bowls in this last year. For this year's Super Bowl, I covered remotely from my living room, which was interesting. But I covered everything on Zooms because I didn't want to fly to Tampa and stay a couple weeks down there with the masses, having not been inoculated. So most of the NFL writers in the country did it that way. There was about 100 on site, and there's normally about 3,000 people on site to cover the Super Bowl. So most people did it that way. So anyways, I've covered the Broncos since 2005 when we moved here from Wisconsin, and I had covered the Packers for about 12 years before that. So I've been here a little while, but not as long as Dave Logan, who, if y'all don't know all of his background, it's in the book. And it's if these walls could talk, stories from the Denver Broncos sideline, locker room, and press box. So Dave and I hooked up to do this project. It's an imprint out of Chicago, Triumph Books, and they've done they don't do every team. They just do teams with really good regional followings, like the Patriots, the Broncos, the Cowboys, and then in other sports they've done in this imprint, like the Red Wings, the Islanders in hockey, in the Cardinals. They did do the Rockies, the Dodgers, so maybe about 3 or 4, 5 of the most fervent fan bases in each sport. And it's all called, If These Walls Could Talk. And then what they do is they get a longtime sports writer and a longtime broadcaster and kind of collaborate. And there's a little bit of a formula to the book series, which I didn't follow because I've always been a little bit more of a independent-minded type of writer. And so they sent me a whole bunch of books years ago, when I had signed a contract to do this book. And they said, well, here's what the others have looked like. And I didn't read any of them. I looked at them, but I always want to just kind of do things my way. And I figure if I screw it up, they'll let me know, but I haven't. And so most of the books in this series are a little bit shorter than mine. Mine came in at about, let me see, well, more than 300, about 350 pages or more. Usually they're about half that maybe. But the Broncos have a rich history, and so I wanted to, to give it justice, to do it justice. And what happened was, so the book just came out a few months ago, but it's something that's been on our radar for years. And they first approached me about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and they said, "Are you interested?" I said, "Sure, it sounds like a great project." But Dave Logan was not at the time very interested. Dave is a very private individual. He's always been kind of shy to talk about himself, which a lot of people are like that, but he had a lot of good stories to tell, and his story is a good one to tell. So we just kind of, sat on the idea for a little while, and then one day I was at the store, and I got a phone call from the publisher that said, "Hey, Dave Logan has finally agreed to the project. He just called and said he was willing to do it." And at that point, I called Dave Logan, and the way we did the book was, so I wrote the entire book, but what I did was I interviewed Dave about maybe 15 or 20 times, about an hour at a time, hour and a half, 2 hours at Starbucks, just over coffee. And well, for me, it's tea, but we would meet up at a Starbucks, and I would just ask him about, about his life, about his career, about his, how he got into the business of, so what Dave does is he's the play-by-play guy for the Broncos. He's covered the team for 4 decades, and on radio and mostly radio, but also on television. And so he's had kind of a front row seat to the Broncos for 4 decades, and his own background is fascinating. Dave is one of a handful of individuals who have been drafted by 4 major sports teams. When he was an athlete growing up, when he was a teenager here in Denver, he was terrific at all sports, and he was drafted by the Cincinnati Reds, by the Kansas City Kings of the NBA, and by the Cleveland Browns. And he ended up going to play football, which he thinks was a little bit crazy because his best sport was baseball, and he was really good at basketball. And he played all these sports at the University of Colorado. He didn't get to play baseball because the coach there said, "I want you playing spring football." So he didn't get to play baseball, but he was going to, and he was recruited to do so. So he gets in a 10-year career in the NFL. And at the time, he was probably the second biggest wide receiver in the game. Nowadays, there's a lot of big wide receivers, but in his day, in the 70s, he was a giant for his time, for his position. And of course, he grew up a Broncos fan. And so at the end of his career, he wanted to come to Denver. And he asked the Browns if you're ever going to trade me to the Denver Broncos. and they accommodated his wishes. But it didn't go very good. He only played a couple of games for the Broncos, and he got, for lack of a better word, he got fired. Dan Reeves called him into his office one day about a month into the season and said, "Goodbye, you're cut." And, for anybody, that's a tough thing. You get fired, that's not a good thing. But Dave went out to his Jeep in the parking lot at the Broncos, and he was always a music guy, but he just turned on AM radio, and he started listening and they were talking about him getting cut. And it was Irv Brown, who had been the baseball coach at Colorado, but now he's broadcasting. And Irv and Joe were talking about what a bum rap Dave Logan had gotten. And so he listens all the way home, and he's saying, "Hey, this is pretty interesting." And then that's the first time he had ever listened to talk radio, or sports radio for that matter. And what he didn't realize at the time, obviously, was that that was going to be his second career in football. He had the NFL career for playing, and his second career turned out to be in radio. And really a third career turned out to be, as I'm sure a lot of you know, coaching high school kids. He's the only coach in the country who has won championships at 5 different schools in the state's highest classification. He's won the last 2 state championships at Cherry Creek. So he has kind of parlayed his love of sports and his time in the NFL into these dual secondary careers. One is teaching kids football, and the other is talking football. And so, and then he's been covering the Broncos, like I said, for about 4 decades. And as part of that gig, he does a coach's show and a quarterback show. So he's really gotten to know all the head coaches in Denver and all the quarterbacks that have come through Denver over the years. So he has some fascinating stories. And again, I wrote 100% of the book, but what I did, and this is unique in the series, because again, I didn't do what they asked me to and read what others had done and kind of follow that same formula. What I decided was I would put in a lot of my own recollections and kind of historically look at some things, and then ask him for his insight. And so sometimes when he went on and it was good stuff, I created this thing called Logan's Logs, where he would just kind of talk about whatever topic was in that chapter. Some of that, obviously I quoted him throughout the book, but it was basically, I forget how many chapters, but it's a lot of chapters. 35 chapters and then acknowledgments. And the 35th chapter is actually about 10 chapters, and it's a nice little story on all the Hall of Famers. The caveat is that Peyton Manning doesn't have his own chapter because he was such a major part of the book itself. And John Elway doesn't have his own chapter because he too was a major part of the book itself. But everybody else, like Floyd Little or Pat Bolin, there's kind of a chapter on each of them, although it's not called its own chapter. At the end of the book, it's just kind of I think we call it memorable bonds. And I wrote kind of big, huge features on these guys. And then he kind of chimed in with his thoughts on, for instance, Shannon Sharp, how he took a real interest in him when he was a rookie, just because he was a big bodied guy like he had been. And of course, Sharp at the beginning of his career was also a wide receiver, and then was converted into a tight end, and then became one of the best tight ends in history. So like I said, 90% of the book was me talking to Dave over coffee and tea. And then I would tape record our conversations on my phone, and I would go to the Broncos and spend about an hour transcribing. And I transcribed all this, tape, and I had all this material. And then I buckled down. A year ago, November and December, I would write the book. I would from 11 p.m. till 3 a.m. every night. I would stay up and kind of crank out a chapter or two. And I take copious notes, and so that finally came in handy. Well, it comes in handy all the time in my job, but it came in especially handy because I had forgotten certain things about Tim Tebow, for instance, certain instances, and I could go back into my notes, and I had quotes, and I had observations, and I had lots of nice interviews from John Elway and others that when I write a story for Associated Press, I may talk to a guy for 20 minutes and then use 2 or 3 sentences of his quotes. For a book, you can use a lot more, and so I was able to kind of go back into 5, 10, 15 years old interviews and cull anecdotes and quotes out of there, and then get Dave's take and put it together. So when I finally sat down to write the book, it took 6 weeks, maybe, working 4 hours a night. And at the time, my dog Chaco, who I dedicated the book to my dog Chaco. He was a chocolate lab. We lost him about 6 months ago, but he was a great dog, and he was my constant companion through this whole project. And sometimes I would be watching Colbert on TV or something, and he would come and bark at me to get up off the couch, go into the other room, sit down at my computer, and write my book and write my stories. And so about halfway through those 4 hours, we would take a little break for a snack, maybe a little walk outside. And that was our routine. And it became such a routine that when I turned in the manuscript and I was very excited, that next night, Chaco didn't care. He got me out of my couch, and we had to go in there and do something on the computer because it was time to write the book. So it was kind of a cool thing. And then we edited the book. Dave and I went through with a fine tooth comb and edited the book just over several days in April, maybe 2-3 hours at a time, 1 hour, whatever we could fit into to his schedule and mine. And then the book came out in the fall, and we actually got a box of books maybe about a week or so before Chaco died. He was 11 years old. He was a good pup, but it was kind of cool because I came in the house and I said, Chaco, we got our book. And he starts kissing on me as if he understood, that our book had come out. So it's If These Walls Could Talk. And so I'm going to quit talking because I don't usually like to talk this much, but I will certainly entertain any questions anybody has about the book or the process or anything else. So if anybody wants to ask a question, I'm all ears.
So Arnie, who is your favorite Denver Bronco player?
Wow. There's been a couple over the years that I've had pretty good relationships with. Von Miller's one of them. He's a complicated fellow because I know he's gotten into some trouble. I always say that we don't really know guys. We don't really know players. We, just like anybody else, we're around them, and they kind of have a public persona. And even if you go up to them in the locker room and talk to them, you don't really get to know a guy. But he was one guy I've been pretty close with. Aqib Talib, another guy who has quite a interesting background off the field. He's gotten into some trouble for various things, including shooting himself in the butt one time in Dallas, and that prevented him from going to the White House to celebrate with President Obama the Broncos Super Bowl 50 championship. However, I got to know these guys on a personal level, and they've been pretty. I like them a lot. Chris Harris Jr. was another. Tim Tebow, actually, I got to know on a pretty good level. I wasn't a big fan of him as a player, but a huge fan of him as a person. It seemed like when he was here, I was writing about Tim Tebow like constantly. And so I had to come up with some really creative stories to write. And that was a lot of fun. One time I just went up to guys in the locker room, and I had one question. I got one question for you. Okay, go ahead. And I'd say, who is Tim Tebow? And they'd look at me kind of quizzically, like, what are you talking about? And I wouldn't explain what I meant. I would just say, who is Tim Tebow? I would maybe emphasize a different word. Who is Tim Tebow? And they'd all, oh, okay, I get what you're telling me. And then they would, some guys thought I was asking about him as a religious man. Some guys thought I was asking about him as a quarterback, or as a quirky quarterback, or as a teammate. But I got all these fascinating responses. And then I would share them with Tim. Hey, I'm doing this. This is the story I'm doing on you this weekend. And sometimes it was just talking to former left-handed quarterbacks, or sometimes it was more football related. But in having to do that, to come up with more creative stories, I really got to know Tim in a really different way, in a different level, because I would talk to him. I would kind of come up to the side of him in the locker room, and hey, he'd wonder, what was I working on this week? Because he always knew that I was doing kind of a big takeout for that weekend, and sometimes it was on his faith, and sometimes it was on his the pull to get into politics. There were at the time some Republican presidential candidates that wanted his endorsement, and he wouldn't give anybody his endorsement because he feared that they would make him look bad eventually, which he's probably right. But it was still, I kind of got to know him on a different level. So there's a lot of guys here, that I could say was my favorite. Champ Bailey is probably my favorite to talk to. We used to have some great conversations. And then when he went into the Hall of Fame, I talked to his brother, and I talked to his coaches from high school and college, and that was a lot of fun. But a lot of it I knew just on background, because I had gotten to know Champ really, really well. I do have to say this though. In my career, my favorite player is Brett Favre, because he was by far the funnest guy to talk to. He would, when I was covering the Packers, the MVP award, the most valuable player award, along with All Pro and all the other awards, Coach of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, they're administered by the Associated Press. And so at the time, I would actually get kind of like, I would get word that he had won the most valuable player award before anybody else. And so I would actually be the one to inform him. In fact, when we moved, he signed a picture of himself for me, and he put, "Thanks for the MVP calls." And so, some of that just had to do with that shared history that we had. But Brett Favre was a terrific guy, and Peyton Manning was too. It's just that I had more of a history with Favre. So I must say that, for all these Broncos that are, been fun to cover, John Elway, Brett kind of is at the top of my list, just because we kind of had that kind of a cool connection.
So when the Packers and the Broncos play, can we assume you cheer for the Packers?
No, actually, Julia, I don't cheer for anybody. I cheer for a good story. I know that sounds weird. My wife likes to cheer for the Packers, but I'm going to show you guys something that I have here that Kate won't allow me to put up in our house. So a photographer friend of mine, rest his soul, Ed Andrieski, he took this photo, but I'll just show it to you, and then you'll understand what I'm saying. So that's the helicopter play where John Elway made this great play in the Super Bowl when he beat the Packers in Super Bowl 31. And it kind of epitomized John Elway's career, that he wanted to win so bad that he got hit by 3 guys and spun around like a helicopter. And so I got that picture, but I can't put it up because Kate won't let me. But So anyways, I really don't cheer for a team. I cheer for a good story. Like you had mentioned earlier, I do have favorite players, and I hope they do well. But I've really, probably, when I started covering sports, I had favorite teams as a kid, but not, as I got to covering them. And oddly enough, I've covered the teams that I rooted for as a kid, like the Cowboys, the Packers, and the Broncos were the three teams I followed because I grew up in Albuquerque, and we would get those three teams every Sunday or every weekend. And so oddly enough, I've covered all of them, but I cheer for a good story. That's what I cheer for. And usually there's a good story there. So I usually end up happy. Whether or not, the team, the people around me are happy or not. At this Super Bowl, I was basically focused on the Buccaneers for 2 weeks. So I was kind of hoping Tom Brady would win. And I know a lot of people around here don't like Tom Brady. But I thought it was a great story for him to, first season after leaving Belichick's, lair, he goes and he wins a championship with a team that hadn't been to the playoffs in 13 years, hadn't won a championship in 19 years, 18 years. And so I was cheering for the good story. And I think during the Super Bowl, some of that cheering for the good story kind of came out as though I was celebrating the Buccaneers' dominance of the game. But I was just really kind of hoping for a good story to write, and I got it. So I was happy about that.
Arn, there's a question in the chat that says, did you learn more about football or more about writing during this process?
Gosh, I will say that I didn't stress over the book as much as I stress over a story. My whole thing is brevity. And so when I'm telling a story in my daily life, I try to tell it as quickly as possible, because let's face it, attention spans aren't what they used to be. And so what I appreciated about writing the book was that I could kind of open a vein and just write. And, but I didn't stress out about, really making the turn of phrase or anything. I just figured I'd write it and see how it came out. And it really didn't take much editing, because I was basically retelling stories with the advantage of being able to know the outcome and kind of going through and smoothing off the edges. They say that, like journalism is the first draft of history, but with a book, it's kind of like you can look back and really polish things up. So it wasn't like I learned anything writing wise, football wise. I know the game, I cover the strategy of it and everything. So this was more just telling stories. I mean, it was basically like 40 long form journalistic stories that then we pieced together into a book, and we called them chapters. So I guess that's a tough question to answer. I'm not sure that what I learned is that I enjoy writing, and the topic I know best is football. So putting the two of them together was a cool thing. I'd written I'd co-authored some previous projects, some previous books on baseball, but this is the first one that I was writing from scratch, and it was all kind of my ideas and stuff. So that was fun. It was a little stressful, and when I first started and I wrote the first chapter and I looked at it and it was about 1,000 words, and I thought, oh God, I'm not going to finish this book if I don't, because I was writing it like I write a newspaper story, where I'll use the best quote, maybe two, from a player and write the rest of the story. And I did that with the first chapter, and I realized, okay, I'm going to have to use a lot more of the quotes and go into a lot more detail than I'm used to, or I'm never going to get to, I forget the number of words they wanted. I think it was like 50,000 words. And it ended up being, like I said, maybe almost twice that, but which they were fine with. but it was, I guess that's the one thing I learned, is that I needed to write more, which is kind of the antithesis of what, I always do every day, which is to boil everything down to the essence and try to be creative with it. This was, okay, go ahead and write long, and let's just see where it goes. And whenever you're writing something long, even if it's not fiction, if it's historical or something, it is interesting how it'll kind of lead you in one way, and then you can pick up the next chapter and kind of tie it in seamlessly. So it is kind of interesting that sometimes that would happen. Sometimes it would take me in a surprising way to get around to whatever point I was making, and then I would pick up in the next chapter and kind of link it all together. That was interesting.
Arn Revlin wants to know about the typewriter behind you.
That was a pickup from the Presbyterian church by my house in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, about 25 years ago or something like that. It was covered in a very ugly, cracked leather green faded cover, and then it had a little sign on it that said $5, and nobody looked under the cover. And when I looked under the cover, I grabbed it. I said, "Oh, I want this," and then I threw the cover away, and that's why it's sitting there like that. But it's really, it's workable. I've actually typed on it, but it's basically just a piece for conversation. And I found it at it was a Presbyterian church garage sale in
Melissa
Wisconsin.
wants to know what brand it is.
Oh, it's Woodstock. And I'm not sure how old it is, but I would venture to guess it's 100 years old. I'm not sure, but.
Anybody else question? I can't see everybody on my screen at one time, so I don't want to miss anybody. Charlie Ledbetter.
I read Arnie's book and I loved it. I'm so old. I saw Dave Logan play high school basketball and baseball. But Arnie, I wanted you to compare handling the Broncos and the Packers versus the Cowboys. The Denver Broncos and the Packers are pretty regional, but somewhat remote locations. And then Dallas is a big megalopolis. How is that the same, or how is it different in covering those teams?
That's thanks, Charlie. That's an interesting question. All of these three teams have such a huge following that there's an enormous amount of press that cover a team. When Peyton Manning came here, he had no idea. He thought this was a little cow town. He had no idea because there was 4 reporters that covered him in Indianapolis, and he got here and there was 40 on a daily basis and a couple hundred on Sundays. And Peter King, I mentioned it in the book, Peter King says covering the Broncos is like covering any other team. 1 year is like 3 years, which is true. There's just such an interest. It moves the needle. The Broncos move the needle. The Packers are that way too, but in a different sense. Theirs has more to do, I think, with history. And the Cowboys are a different animal altogether because it's just such a competitive media market. A lot of people talk about, Philadelphia is a tough place for players because, the media is mean to them or the fans are mean to them. And New York's another animal because it's New York, it's a Big Apple. But really, I think when you look at it, I think the Broncos, the Packers, the Cowboys, the Washington football team is another one that's hugely popular regionally. And all these teams have at various times dominated the league. I think you would probably have to put New England in that mix after Brady's 20-year run of success. Kind of those five, 6 teams. So it's very similar, all of them, in that it's very competitive. Probably Dallas is a little more hyper competitive and maybe more on the radio side, more so than on print, although it all melds together nowadays, print. And I mean, I got into the journalism thinking I was just going to strictly be a writer. And now I do radio, I do a TV show, I do blogs. I take pictures on my iPhone. I do videos and cut up the video on my iPhone, and now I do a book. So, any kind of media we all get into now. And that's just the way it is. But Dallas is a little more hyper in that sense. And like I said, a lot of people don't realize the Broncos are such a big deal, win or lose. Even these last 5 years where they haven't been to the playoffs, they move the needle a lot. Just whether it's Elway or the Bolin family fight, what's going on the field. It's just always something. And there are teams that you can go the whole year, Jacksonville or something, even Indianapolis, where it's just not that way. No. I mean, I know I'm pretty active with the Football Writers Association, and we fight tooth and nail for access issues. And then we find out, like in Atlanta, that the writers there kind of agree amongst each other that they're not going to show up on Friday to give the coach a little bit of a break. Let's not show up on Friday. Well, that's crazy, because we're fighting tooth and nail to get access. And here, like if you decided not to show up on Friday, well, okay, you're going to get beat on the stories that day, But in a lot of places, it's not that way. I've been fortunate to keep me on my toes. I've been fortunate to be in a lot of markets that are hyper competitive. And like I said, it's hard to compare them all. They're all pretty similar, and each have their own idiosyncrasies that make them kind of enjoyable or stressful or whatever word you want to use.
Yes, Carol.
Arnie, when you were younger, did you play football?
I did play football, but oddly enough, I was a baseball player in college, and baseball was my sport. And really, because oddly enough, I didn't understand football when I was a kid. I understood it on a superficial level, but when we were talking, a position, a certain position and what they had to do and strategy and that kind of thing, it went over my head. So I was more into baseball and basketball. But even when I first started with Associated Press and I started covering sports, I was still really into baseball. Like I said, I did a book with Nolan Ryan. I did a chapter on his minor league career in this like coffee table book. And then during the home run chase of, what year was it? 98?
It was 98.
98. I contributed a lot of what turned into chapters into a book that AP put together on that. So I was really into baseball. And then that really changed, even when I was covering the Cowboys for the first few years of my career, I enjoyed it, but I was still into baseball. And then that really changed when I got to Wisconsin, and covering the Packers was like, Lambeau Field's like the Mecca of the NFL. And there's such a religious fervor to the Packer experience that I really got into football. And then it got to the point that I was really, I covered a lot of bad baseball. I've covered, in 36 years, I think, with AP. I covered my first year, I joined AP, I covered the Dodgers and they won the World Series. Now, this is great, this is going to be awesome. And I have not covered a champion since. I covered the Rockies 2007 Rocktober run. And so twice in 36 years, I've covered really good teams. On the other hand, I covered the Cowboys' return to glory, the return to glory by the Packers and the return to glory by the Broncos, and I've covered Troy Aikman, Brett Favre, Peyton Manning, so I've had the fortune of covering great football teams. And that's probably why my love of the game shifted from baseball to football, because I would cover baseball. And I would cover bad baseball teams, and you'd be at the ballpark for 12 hours a day. And you do that every day in the summer. You just get like, okay, I've had it with bad baseball. On the other hand, I've never covered an NBA champion in all my time. So I'm not a big, I like basketball. I like college hoops. I've covered a couple of good teams like Marquette, back in in Wisconsin when Marquette had Dwayne Wade and they made it to the Final Four. They didn't win it. And, and I have colleagues that are the exact opposite. They've covered bad football and good basketball teams, and they're a huge basketball fan, or they've covered good baseball teams and they're just a huge baseball fan. So some of it's circumstantial, I think. I've just been fortunate to, cover really good football teams. And so I've gotten to, to really love the game more than any other sport.
Arn, I got one from Jerry Brewster.
Okay.
He said, was there any player who seemed to always get bad breaks, maybe injuries, but was a good player, but without the bad breaks would have been a fantastic player?
Well, I think the one guy I can think of right off the top of my head is Jake Butt right here in Denver. He has a mind that wants to play football, and he's got a body that keeps telling him he better do something else because he's had 4 ACL tears in his knees, 3 in college and 1 in the NFL. And he's, he came back this year and was playing a little bit, but then got hurt again. He had different injuries. It wasn't knee this time. He had a hamstring, an ankle injury. So Jake Butt, God love him. He's a terrific kid. And I think he would have been a terrific tight end, 10 years, Hall of Fame type of career, but his body just tells him, no, this is not for you. As much as you love the game, his knees keep going out on him. And every knee injury he had, he also, a year later, had to have a cleanup that delayed his recovery. And it happened this time too, last year, which is just too bad, So that's the guy that comes off to the top of my head that, could have been a great player, but for injuries. And injuries are they're just a part of football. And so guys, especially nowadays, they can make so much money that it's not like they have to keep trying to play and putting their bodies through torture. A lot of them, the careers are truncated, but they can, they can get they can make their money and be set for life if they don't do anything stupid, which is not always the case. But if they are smart, then they can, they can parlay that. And even Jake Butt has made some good money, part of it through an insurance policy that he took out fortuitously before he got hurt the last time, coming out of college, which kind of softened the blow a little bit, I think, of getting hurt again.
I think I saw another hand or two, but I can't see everybody's.
Okay.
If you have a question, go ahead and unmute and ask if I can't see you.
I had a question.
Okay.
I don't know if you, yeah, there we go. Oh, you were talking about some of the favorite players that were good to talk to, good interviews. I was wondering about the series of Bronco coaches, kind of from Shanahan on, whether there was one in particular that were easy to interview or good to interview. And then I had one more, what's your gut feeling of Drew Lock's future would be? Whether he has it to make it to step up to the second level from
Right.
where's that?
Okay, well, I'll start off with the coaches. I have had the fortune of having some really good coaches to cover. Oddly enough, Mike Shanahan, we get along great. I call him all the time and talk to him and ask him about his family, and he's great. The funny thing, when I first got here, we were always yelling at each other, or he would say something, I'd write it, and then he would backtrack and say, well, I was just joking. And I'd say, well, I wrote it like you weren't joking. So, we had like a little bit of an adversarial relationship at first, but certainly in retirement, man, he's great. We talk all the time, and he's always appreciative of my, calling to ask about his kid Kyle. I did a story 2 years ago, about his kid coaching in the Super Bowl, and he was great. He was great for this book, so Mike was always terrific. I also had an adversarial relationship with his replacement, Josh McDaniels, and that never really got better. I saw him at a Super Bowl a couple years ago, and he acted like he didn't know me. So, but some of that had to do with some stories I broke during his tenure here that he didn't like. But I've had good relationships with Vance Joseph. I had a really good relationship with Vance, where he could, we'd talk off the record and he'd tell me, some pretty good stuff and kind of shape my coverage a little bit. And Vic's the same way now. Gary and I got along pretty good, but he was in a weird spot, Gary Kubiak, when he was here. He was kind of torn between wanting to do this and not wanting to do this. His health was an issue. His wife was kind of telling him, hey, for your health's sake, maybe not want to do this. And he was, fighting it. And so he was in a weird spot. So we didn't have as good of a rapport as I think we could have, or as we used to. When I knew him in his previous machinations as, Elway's buddy or backup or OC, offensive coordinator. But I've gotten along with him pretty good. As far as Drew Lock, it's all up to him. His footwork is a mess. And if you go back and look at all his interceptions, there's a common theme to him. He's throwing, his footwork's bad. He's always in the shotgun and he's throwing to where the help is on defense. So that tells me he's not reading the defenses fast enough or even properly at the snap or pre-snap. He's got a lot of talent. I think he'll get another chance this year. The Broncos can, cut bait and move on afterwards. He's on his rookie contract. They can pivot after this season, and it's no big deal. I'm not, if you listen to, and I listen to 104.3 The Fan all the time, and I think that they're just trying to get, move the needle a little bit because they're always talking about quarterbacks and Deshaun Watson and who are they going to bring in. And I just don't think Deshaun Watson's going anywhere this year. And this is not insight from, the management or the team. It's just my observation. I don't think he's going anywhere. I think they're going to stick with Drew. I mean, they may bring in a veteran to compete with him and to maybe fill in if he gets hurt or whatever. I think Drew gets another year to prove himself, and it's all up to him. If he can improve his footwork and if he can improve his pre-snap reads and kind of make that jump, I think he's got a chance to stay here and be pretty good. I'm not a betting man, but if I were a betting man, I'd put money on that he'll get this year and then he'll be gone and they'll move in another direction, but not now. I don't think. I think that he's going to get another chance. And the only caveat to all that is George Payton's new and he's been kind of holed up and out of sight. I don't know the way he's thinking and if he wants to make a splash. I'll say this: he's got a 6-year contract. He doesn't need to make a splash right away and change things up. I think he can sit back, watch for a year, see if Drew is the guy, and if not, he'll have more ammo in a year to go out and get the guy he wants, either through trade or drafting or whatever it may be. So I think I think all the hype right now is just that on quarterbacks is just hype.
Arn, can you say where they can find the book?
Right now, yeah, you can actually, if you want to email Kate, she can give you some information. I have a box of them that we can get out. I can sign it for you. I'll inscribe anything you want. They're $18. If you want to send them, have them mailed to somebody, it's that plus postage a little bit. But you could get a hold of Kate if you have any. If you want a book or whatever you want inscribed on it, to whomever or whatever you want me to say, I'm glad to say anything. But yeah, I know that they've been selling pretty good during COVID. The oddity of it is Barnes and Noble changed the way that they acquire books from publishing houses. So instead of being able to say, for instance, well, the 10 Barnes and Nobles in Colorado would like to order, an overload of these books because it's Broncos, the books go from the publisher in Chicago to a warehouse in New Jersey, and then they're distributed. So they'll literally send like 11 or 12 books to Colorado in a week or a month. And it's like, well, those are already spoken for and gone. And then because of COVID too, it's also changed some of the way that they're sold, like in Costco's or this sort of thing. It's kind of weird, but like I said, if you want one, I can certainly sign it and we can get it to you. We can either drive it out to you or put it in the mail and send it. The other thing is if you'd like, you could look on like Amazon and find it there too. So either online or you could get it from us.
Anybody else? So Paul, you can tell people where this recording will be.